Good morning. It is Monday, the 30th of March. I'm Maeve McMahon and you're watching Europe Today, your daily wrap of European news and context in just 20 minutes. Coming up, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he plans to further expand the military campaign in southern Lebanon. This as the United Nations warns of widespread devastation in Lebanon, with around 20% of the population now internally displaced and many dead. Meanwhile, Iran says it would set any US troops, quote, on fire after reports the Pentagon is planning potential raids and troop deployments. With the conflict entering its sixth month, G7 finance and energy ministers are holding emergency talks today to try to contain the growing energy shock, while Iran is grappling with power cuts after airstrikes and explosions were heard in the capital throughout the night. For more on what seems to be intensifying on all fronts, we can cross over now to Doha and bring in Euronews' regional correspondent there, Adel Halim, for an update. Good morning, Adel. So we're seeing through the night Israel and Iran continuing to trade strikes, despite Pakistan's attempts to bring all players around the table for talks. What's the latest?
Maeve, the situation across the region is quite volatile. Over the weekend, diplomatic efforts intensified with regional powers such as Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt sending their top diplomats to Pakistan in hopes of creating a path to direct talks between Washington and Tehran and de-escalate this now month-long war. Now, speaking to reporters on Air Force One, U.S. President Donald Trump says they are negotiating with Iran, quote, directly and indirectly, but also says troops could seize Karg Island, Iran's oil export hub. The U.S. has deployed around 3,500 more troops to the region, and Iran is already responding in what looks like a warning. State media says its parliament speaker warned Iranian forces were, quote, waiting for the arrival of American troops on the ground to rain fire on them. On Friday, it carried out a strike on a U.S. airbase in Saudi Arabia, injuring 15 troops and damaging several aircraft. So the message there seems twofold. It's a warning to Washington about what could happen if things escalate, and a signal to regional allies that they are within striking range. Meanwhile, all American universities here in Qatar have now been closed, and that's in direct response to a threat from the IRGC as in response to U.S.-Israeli targeting two Iranian universities.
Okay, so everyone very much still there on edge. Adel Halim, thank you so much for that update there from Doha. Meanwhile, Israel is facing controversy over Palm Sunday celebrations in Jerusalem this weekend that saw 4 representatives of the Catholic Church prevented from holding Mass by Israeli police. Israel has already weighed in, with the Prime Minister saying he will offer full and immediate access after the Vatican demanded answers. For more, we're joined now in the studio by our EU editor, Maria Tadeo. Good morning, Maria.
Good morning.
So look, this is not really just about religion. It's an international diplomatic spat now. What happened?
Well, it is, and it was becoming one because you immediately saw a reaction, not just from the Vatican, which said that this was the first time in, quote, centuries that the Patriarch of Jerusalem, the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, was not able to enter the Holy Church of the Sepulchre because of security reasons initially cited by Israel. You also had very strong comments from the Italian Prime Minister, which has recalled the Israeli ambassador to Italy, the French president, the Spanish Prime Minister, too, in that sort of heat building over the day, the course of the day, also leading up to what is going to be a critical week, because, of course, this is Easter week and more celebrations are expected, certainly from the Thursday to the Sunday. The Israeli governments have now reversed course. The Israeli Prime Minister, hopefully we can put this up on the board, put out a statement yesterday saying, this is Benjamin Netanyahu, that as soon as he learned about the incident, so of course that is Cardinal Pizzaballa not being able to enter the church, he has now instructed authorities to enable the Patriarch to hold services as he wishes. Of course, as I say, this is relevant because of the status quo in Jerusalem when it comes to putting together holy sites for 3 religions, but also this is Easter week, so it is a very, the most important celebration for Christians, certainly for Catholics. It's a deeply spiritual spiritual moment, also emotional. So this you have to tread very carefully. Where you're seeing now the Israeli authorities sort of backpedaling, saying perhaps there was a confusion among the different authorities. This was all done because of security reasons. No malice, no ill intent, but nonetheless will reverse course to allow mass to take place.
And meanwhile, today we will see G7 emergency talks among finance and energy ministers. What should we expect?
Well, yes, so you see the war is now pretty much touching every aspect of life. Today's G7 energy ministers, G7 finance ministers, and also the central bankers who will be joining. And that is relevant because it tells you there are concerns perhaps on the fiscal side of things, the economy on a much broader basis. So they are meeting today. The International Agency for Energy said last week that this could be the biggest disruption since the 70s. So, of course, the goal is now to bring together the big 7 economies around the world. When it comes to the Europeans, there's a number of measures that have been floated and put on the table. One is considering now a windfall tax. So, of course, that is a special tax that gets put affecting the corporates because of these extra profits that they may book, passing on them to the consumer. This is a tax that is not popular among corporates and companies, but that could be installed. For the time being, no immediate action, but it's certainly on the table. There has been also speculation about an oil price cap. This was done in 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine. And then, of course, there's a commission which has been under immense pressure for 2 weeks now, especially going back to the summit, to put together now a full package. They say they are working on it, but the goal is to put fiscal measures, tailor measures that do not affect, of course, climate targets and regulations.
Just briefly, are they really united, though, the G7?
Well, that's a very good point because we saw already on the Friday when the G7 foreign ministers met in France, there was a reported spat between Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary of State, and Kaja Kallas, a top European diplomat, in which it's understood that Kaja Kallas asked the Americans, when are you going to increase pressure on Russia? This is connected to the energy story because oil up means more extra money for Russia, and the Americans have to have snapped back and say, well, if you think you can do a better job, then you do it.
OK. Maria Tadeo, our EU News editor, thank you so much for those updates. And just on Israel, Euronews is reporting an exclusive story this morning about the Prime Minister's new measures against settler violence as the IDF potentially plans to move some troops from Lebanon towards the West Bank. You can read more about that on our website. But now, coming up, we'll be joined by the EU Commissioner for the Oceans and Fisheries from Cyprus, Kostas Kadis. A former Minister for Education and Agriculture back home. His country, of course, Cyprus, is now in the spotlight for the first 6 months of the year, because Cyprus is currently holding the rotating EU presidency of the EU Council. Commissioner Kadis, thank you so much for joining us here.
Thank you for inviting me, and good morning.
So, of course, Cyprus is chairing now the EU Council, not yourself, because obviously as a commissioner you don't represent your country, you represent all Europeans. But, you know, the war in Iran has really dominated the issue.
Indeed.
How is it impacting you?
You mean the presidency? Yeah. As far as I know, they have postponed all the activities during March. But things are returning back to normality from April and onwards. So I think that now things will be normal and the presidency will be concluded normally.
And are Cypriots feeling safe now? Because a few weeks ago we saw a lot of drones intercepted. We saw Emmanuel Macron coming in.
Yeah, now things are getting better. No more incidents after that first attack. And life in Cyprus is back to normality.
And meanwhile, as these wars are raging, there's still serious issues facing the European Union when it comes to climate, the environment, many policies being neglected. We're seeing severe overfishing, we're seeing pollution, and we're seeing biodiversity loss. And this is the area that you're supposed to prioritise. But how can you, in a world with so many wars raging?
Yeah, the challenges are many. Now we're focusing on providing support to our sector so that it remains competitive, because indeed the conflict in the Middle East has negatively affected the fisheries and aquaculture sectors, the seafood market and the coastal communities. And we need to discuss a way of supporting the sector to remain competitive.
So what kind of measures are you thinking of? Short-term measures are you thinking of?
This is a topic that we will discuss today at the Agri-Fish Council. We are exploring solutions in the framework of the European Maritime Fisheries and Aquaculture Fund. We want to enable member states to provide support to the member states through this fund. This was done again in the energy crisis after the war initiated in Ukraine.
And how nervous are the ministers? What's the kind of feeling that you're getting?
Yes, they're getting nervous because the operators are very, very nervous. I met with representatives of the sector on Friday. They informed me that some operators have already stopped their activities because they had a marginal profitability, and now with the increase of the fuel prices, they cannot deal with the cost. Therefore, my message today will be clear to the ministers. First, we need a united response, a European response that will support the sector. And second, we need to accelerate our efforts towards energy transition in order to avoid future energy shocks like the ones we had today.
And that, of course, takes time. Commissioner Callies, thank you so much for coming with us today
Thank you.
on Europe Today here on Euronews. Now, moving on, Bruce Springsteen and Robert De Niro, just some of the celebrities that took to the streets this weekend to protest against the politics and policies of President Donald Trump. Millions were out on the streets of America and also here in Europe. Jakob Janis takes a look at this so-called No Kings movement.
As you might have heard, millions of Americans took to the streets this weekend for the No Kings protests against Donald Trump. But this movement did not stop at the US border. Across Europe, tens of thousands marched in major capitals, revealing a deep, continent-wide anxiety. But wait a second, what exactly is this movement about, and why it is important for Europe? No Kings movement protests against what participants view as Trump's authoritarian governance, targeting his immigration policies, climate denial and military actions in Iran. But why Europeans are so invested? Because his Make America Great Again ideology is already fighting for dominance inside the EU. And the ultimate test right now is Hungary. On the 12th of April, Prime Minister Viktor Orbán faces the political fight of his life against conservative opposition leader Péter Magyar. And Orbán has branded his government as Europe's MAGA stronghold, earning a total endorsement from the US president. And if Orbán secures his 5th consecutive term with US backing, it will fuel other nationalist movements across the continent and is likely to raise concerns about eroding democracy, a weakened rule of law, and a closer ties to Russia from inside the EU. And interestingly, in European republics like France and Italy, the protests seamlessly merge with domestic politics. But in constitutional monarchies like the UK, Spain and Denmark, organizers tried to avoid anti-royalist backlash, rebranding their marches to No Tyrants and keeping their focus on US politics. And here's the irony. European politics has always been historically fragmented. But it seems that Donald Trump is unintentionally helping to forge a pan-European identity. Whether you are protesting against his policies or supporting his MAGA allies, he has become the continent's common denominator.
Jakob Janis reporting for us there. Now, moving on, the Finnish Prime Minister Petteri Orpo has said that a number of Ukrainian drones have gone astray due to a Russian jamming of signals. Helsinki says Kyiv has been carrying out drone attacks on Russian territories along the more than 1,300-kilometre border with Finland. For more on how Finland has been beefing up its defence along that border, Euronews' defence correspondent Shona Murray sent us this dispatch.
Good morning, Maeve. I'm coming to you from Giuseppe, which is the Finnish-Russian border. About 40 kilometres inside the Russian part of this area is the Russian nuclear deterrence. So the importance of the Finnish border guard can't be underestimated. Most of the border here has existed for decades, but it was heavily fortified after the full-scale invasion because, of course, the Finnish border guard are not just defending Finland but NATO territory. And I got caught up with one of the Finnish border guards and I asked them how important their role is.
First and most important is threats against border security, like large-scale illegal immigration or smaller illegal border crossings. That's the number one. And for example, we train our conscripts for our reserve, which is a useful tool if necessary on the wartime.
So basically a full-scale invasion?
Yeah, that's correct.
Finland has had conscription for decades, which is why the Finnish model of security and defence is one of the most important all across Europe. In fact, a model for Europe. And I caught up with one of the conscripts and I asked him a little bit about his experience.
Have you ever held anything like this before you joined as a conscript?
Oh, never. I've never held a rifle in my life. So first time shooting was in the army. You start off with the basic assault rifle. And I found out in the army that I have a gift for shooting. So that's how I got into this marksman. This right here, it's a personal camouflage net, mostly used by marksmen. When I go back to my shooting spot, I'll take it off, lay it over my rifle, and then shoot like that. We're training for reconnaissance, so if war were to start, we would go over the border behind enemy lines and produce information and try and find valuable targets.
Euronews' Shona Murray there reporting for us from the Finnish-Russian border. But as you heard earlier, agricultural ministers from all across the EU will be gathering in Brussels today for key talks. To hear what exactly is at stake for them, I'm joined now by the Irish Minister for State from the Department of Agriculture and Food. That is Timmy Dooley. Good morning.
Morning, Maeve. How are you?
Good. Great to have you with us here. So just tell us, how is the instability in the Middle East and the ongoing war, of course, in Ukraine impacting your talks today?
Yeah, well, sure, it's impacting talks right across Europe. Every Council of Ministers are obviously concerned. From an Irish perspective, we want to see de-escalation. That's really always the approach that Ireland has taken. Try to get a level of agreement between all sides here.
And how are you getting your voice out then?
Well, I think that Taoiseach has been very clear. As you know, he was in Washington recently in the celebration of St. Patrick's Day, and in his conversations with President Trump made it very clear that Ireland can act in a role which we have been very good at as part of that de-escalation process.
And did President Trump listen to him?
Well, I would hope so. I think President Trump listens to people right across the world and leaders across the world, but I think Ireland's position has always been about trying to pull back from the front line, get a dialogue going. Like all wars ultimately end, and what you would want to do is that they end with the least loss of life and least disruption to the activities of, particularly in Europe, member states, but right throughout the world. And
because the Europeans still don't have clarity on what the President Trump's plan is here to end the war.
Nobody seems to have, and that's understandable. But I think as we move towards taking on the presidency in the latter half of this year, Prime Minister Martin will come into the frame very much in acting sort of as head of that European institution. And I think from Ireland's perspective, we've always been really good at peacekeeping, peace monitoring, and de-escalation, and that's again where we will try to bring our skill set to the fore.
And meanwhile today, are you focusing on any particular measures to look after farmers across the board?
Well, of course, the issue for farmers is very stark at the minute, particularly on the rising cost of fuel and also the cost and supply of fertiliser. We want to see a mechanism in place that the CBAM initiative can be put to the side. But we need that mechanism in place that would allow that to happen. So that will be for discussion today. And again, the ongoing fuel crisis, of course, is impacting both on farmers and on fishermen and women, as Commissioner Caddis had rightly identified earlier.
And what about the EU-Mercosur deal? The Commission has decided it will be provisionally implemented as of the 1st of May. Does that make you angry?
Well, no, we note the decision of the Commission. As you know, Ireland was not able to accept the final agreement, although we did get heavily involved in the discussions about ensuring, insofar as possible, that safeguards were there from a market impact perspective. Look, we saw from the start that there were issues around standards, environmental issues, and from that perspective, we want to ensure now that as the Commission moves into a phase of implementation, that the safeguards that were put in place are adhered to, and that the appropriate monitoring is in place to ensure that all those inspections.
EU-Australia deal?
Yeah,
good or bad?
Yeah. Well, as you know, Ireland has deep-seated links with Australia. There's scarcely a family in Ireland that hasn't got links there. So there's real opportunities there. But obviously, we'll have to see the detail. But there are significant opportunities for Ireland, both at the agri-food sector and right across all aspects.
Like the EU India deal too, a good one for Ireland, not like Mercosur, as you say there. Minister Timmy Doolan, thank you so much for coming into us here today on Europe Today on Euronews. And thank you so much for tuning in. For more news analysis, do visit euronews.com. You can also download our app for more intense news. But that does bring this episode to an end. Thank you so much for joining us. See you soon on Euronews.